You're listening to Catalyst for Change, and my name is Jessica Huckabee, your host. I started this podcast to learn what makes people resilient after challenging events and how they've used those series of events as a catalyst for change in their life. You'll hear stories of resiliency and strength, so get ready, sit back, and be prepared to be inspired. Today, my guest is Belle Lockerby. In her literary debut, Awkward is a New Brave, Belle Lockerby becomes our bravery bestie through sharing her personal story of overcoming an arsenal of life's adversity wedgies. Belle encourages everyone to be brave enough to be themselves, awkward enough to try the uncomfortable things, and kind enough to become the safe space for others doing the same. Having coached over 1,000 humans from all walks of life, Belle lives and breathes change. She knows we can repurpose our past using a shield of humor and a sword of honesty to become lovers and fighters for our own lives. So today we'll talk about loss of family to suicide, cancer, work-life balance, starting a business while parenting young children, thought editing, healing from childhood situations, change, your thinking book, conscious thinking, self-care, management of feelings, switching to doing business online. So it's a very dynamic episode, and I hope you enjoy it. Well, thank you, Belle, for coming on my show today, Catalyst for Change Stories. I really enjoyed learning a little bit about your background and experience and things that you went through in your life that you were able to use as a catalyst. Can you go into detail about some of those events?
Yeah, sure. I guess if you start with childhood, and unfortunately it's not an uncommon thing. I grew up with a father who was a highly functioning alcoholic and a mother who suffered from depression. And then you throw in a little bit of childhood abuse, which I think I learnt to kind of silence myself for the sake of protecting others, which was not great. It was not healthy. And that was my first definition of really being brave. I thought that brave meant protecting other people, and did not realize that I was the cost as I kind of went through this. So my mum in particular, her mental health would go through peaks and troughs, and her depression kicked in quite severely when I was about 11. And she fought different battles along the way until she actually took her life when I was 19. So that really impacted me. It's a little bit like the universe just comes and punches you in the chest and really kind of knocks you off your feet.
Yeah.
And the rest of my family didn't cope with that either. So I almost moved into this protect mode again at a different level in terms of just looking at how am I going to look after my family. I've never kind of wanted to take the approach of having events control the rest of my life. Like I think it really taught me the value of life. And for a long period of time there, I felt hugely responsible for her passing because I wasn't able to save her. So, but this is in 1994. So the tools were not available then. So it took a long time for me to kind of heal from that and realize that a 19-year-old did not necessarily have the tools that are available now to know how to manage those kinds of events.
Yeah.
Grew up.
Wow. That is,
I've focused, sorry.
oh no, that's okay. No, that is a huge deal to happen when you're so young. And at 19, I bet you're like most 19-year-olds where you feel like you can conquer the world, that you have all this power and this, you have a knowledge at that time and you think that you know a lot of things, which you later find out that you have a
You
lot to
don't.
learn.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
that's right. And so I threw myself into work and travel and really trying to appreciate the life that I had. But unfortunately, my dad then passed away of cancer at 29, and that threw me in a big way. So I remember talking to my younger sister and saying, I don't think I can go through all the motions again that I did with our mother in terms of, organising everything and being the rock for everybody else. I just didn't know if I was going to be able to cope.
Yeah.
So she picked up that role with the loss of our dad, and it was different. So it taught me that losses impact you in different ways, and whether it's one that you are prepared for or not prepared for, like the suicide, they still hit. I may have had a chance to talk to my father and everything before he passed away and resolve any of our own issues, but it still really hits you.
Yeah.
So then it kind of almost increased this level of, wanting to be really grateful for my life and upping my level of self-care. So my dad did not necessarily make a lot of healthy decisions. He was a very heavy smoker and a very heavy drinker.
Yeah.
And he had his own traumas. So that was his way of coping. And it took me quite a while to work out that his pain and his generation, I talk about I didn't have those tools at 19. He certainly didn't have them when he was 19, and for the life that he grew up with. So that was his way of coping. So there was a huge amount of forgiveness required to kind of go, well, he did not, in my eyes, he did not make the effort to look after his health and well-being and stick around for his children. But it wasn't actually that. It was just, that was his way of coping. It was nothing to do with his love for me or his love for his family. That was just how he was. So to add to it, and I have to admit, I'll tell you a little story in a minute about what happens when I go to talk to medical professionals. Fast track 5 years, and I have my first daughter. And while I'm still pregnant with her, I'm trying to be very organised. So I'm working like 40 hours a week in my job, or probably more like 60 in corporate. And I'm being very organised. So I get my phone out to prepare a text to talk about the arrival of my daughter, because at this point she's kind of hit her due date and she hasn't turned up.
Mm.
And I send a text out to my whole message book accidentally while still pregnant, saying that she's been born. And my older sister rings me and says, how come you hadn't, how come you didn't call to say that you were in labour? And I'm like, because I'm still pregnant.
Oh my gosh.
And I know. And it was in that conversation that she said, well, I've been holding off on telling you news and I need to talk to you. And she said to me, I have cancer, and hers was terminal. So she had metastatic melanoma from a skin cancer that had been removed, I think, 15 years before, and it had metastasized and went and attached itself to her liver and her pancreas and her kidneys, and it was just too late because she had focused so much on caring for her family that she didn't necessarily prioritize going and following through with her own checkups.
Okay. Wow.
So she passed away when my daughter was 4 months old. And I just remember talking to God a little bit and saying, I'm done. Like, I want to call a truce. So I want to call peace. I don't want to be made really strong anymore. I'm strong enough. Please, this is it. I'm all good now.
Yeah.
But that moment there, it really rocked me to my core and really made me consider what do I want to do with my life and what do I want to teach my children.
Yeah.
So it still took me a couple of years, but I eventually left my corporate job, moved from Melbourne in Australia on the East Coast over to Western Australia, obviously on the West Coast.
Yeah.
And decided to start my own business because I wanted to be there for my children. I wanted to work in a way that I could balance well-being and not burn out. And I wanted to it was to fulfill my lifelong goal, which will be to see grandchildren.
Yeah.
So health and well-being became very important. And I decided to start up a fledgling business, which was all about helping other women do the same in terms of leaving their corporate lives once they had children, Sorry if you can hear a door creaking. My lovely husband is just going out.
That's okay.
Sorry about that. It's just life happening around us.
Yeah.
So I started delivering these programs that would run over 8 weeks to help women with setting their goals and time management. But a big part of it was actually talking about well-being and really being open in sharing that story about how important it is to make sure that you go and do your checkups and you look after your own health, and you actually that you go and make sure that you talk to people and that you go through your checks and that you look at asking for help as a sign of strength, as opposed to sometimes thinking about it as a weakness.
Yeah, no, that's so important. That is so important what you mentioned, because that's one of the reasons, well, your sister could have, passed away with still trying to take care of her health, but they would have caught it earlier and it may not have had such a large impact is what I'm hearing.
Yeah.
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 Yeah. Okay. And so I want to go rewind a little bit and see, how did you overcome things and find forgiveness with your father after your mother's passing and you felt a little responsible because there was all this going on at home when you were growing up?
Yeah.
How did you put those things right?
Oh, wow. That is such a good question. And I have been asked, how did I find forgiveness before? It took time. It really did. And it took for me to sit there and not make the whole situation about myself, and to look at, well, hang on, for him to choose those behaviors, they're not choices that you would genuinely make as a fully function, whole and healed person. So I really had to think about what maybe had he been through in his life, and how did he come to make the choices that he had.
Yeah.
And the same for my mum. Like, it was a big thing to kind of go, she chose to take her life. And for me, it brought up all of these issues around abandonment. And I had to approach it in the same way, to look at what had happened during their lifetimes, whether they had spoken about it or not, that set them on that path to think that they were the best choices. And to recognize that the tools that I had available to me were very different to the tools that they may have had available to them as they grew up, including cultural conditioning around it being acceptable or not acceptable for men or for women to reach out and ask for help when it comes to mental wellness or dealing with their own traumas. Because I think my parents grew up in a generation where they were expected to be quite stoic and not necessarily empathetic, but just to be seen as these strong people who could do anything. And that's not necessarily the case. We're all human beings.
No,
So
just knowing that they're human, and knowing that they had different resources, they had a different experience than we had, right?
yes,
Yeah.
very much.
Yeah, no, that's really important to look at it that way. And it sounds like you've moved past that and you were able to pick up some tools along the way, both with your mom, your dad, and your sister's passing, really, to
Yes.
help other people in the work that you're doing now. So can you tell me about some of those tools you've learned?
Yeah, sure. So I guess it comes into a couple of categories. If I start with your thoughts at the start, there's a great book by a lady called Sarah Edelman called Change Your Thinking. And what I take out of that is thought editing. So really being self-aware and self-conscious of whereabouts your mindset is at in terms of how you are looking after your self-care. So especially if you feel that you might be heading towards depression, being conscious of those thoughts is a really big thing. And starting to challenge them and go through this thought editing process of catching it, first of all, to kind of go, is this serving me in a healthy way? Is that first question. And really checking in with it to say, if I put it into perspective with my life, whereabouts is it sitting? Is it supporting me, or am I moving into like a comparison trap? Or am I starting to have certain beliefs about the world, whether I'm feeling responsible for everything or the world is responsible for everything? And how do I start to tweak that thought? And then the last part in that process is around choosing whether you're going to change it and empowering yourself with that choice to say, I can choose to keep thinking this way, or potentially I could choose to look at things differently. And if that's the case, what are some other ways I can look at my situation or my circumstance that might be a little bit healthier for me and for the people around me?
Wonderful. Sounds like a really interesting book. I'm going to have to check that out. Change
Yeah,
your thinking. Okay.
yeah,
Wonderful.
it's really interesting. So that's probably the first one that I tend to talk to people about, is to be really conscious of your thoughts and how you start to edit them. The next part would be those, there's some basic self-care practices that tend to be missed, which is going and following through with your checkups with your healthcare professional to see whereabouts your body is at. And then there's the things that we can easily put into practice daily if possible when we're allowed, which is around looking after exercise and understanding the connections between gut and brain health and hormones and how they can impact us as well, and starting to look at your knowledge in those spaces. So knowing that having enough sleep is a really big factor in terms of whether your mental health is going to be impacted. That's one thing that I find healthcare professionals will always ask about, is what your sleep is like.
Mm-hmm.
So looking at all of those little, I guess, micro wins that can have like a macro impact on our well-being.
Yeah. No, that's well put.
So getting out and getting sunlight, walking, even if it's just walking in nature. So exercising in a way that suits our own physiology, because not everyone's going to be able to go out and run a marathon. It's just not who we are. But finding those pieces of joy that are for you, that can help you with your own well-being, I think is really important, and carving out time for that so it becomes a priority amongst family and work and community and social commitments, so that you get to find that thing that's going to lift you up when you need that lifting up, really.
No, those are all really important. So tools as far as changing, like editing your thoughts and making sure you're on top of those checkups, because those are so important. Seeing the doctor, your primary care physician once a year, getting a checkup,
Yeah.
advocating for yourself and your health and well-being, and really paying attention, you mentioned, to your gut, your brain, your physical being, your hormones, and sleep. Sleep is so important. I think many people don't get enough sleep, and that affects every aspect of your health.
Yeah.
And then just making sure, you carve out that time to take that walk. Maybe it's only an hour walk that you do a day, but just taking that time for you away from, responsibilities, carving that time out.
It's really important. And I think, so I I'm a mum of 4 children. I have 3 sons. One is my biological son, 2 are my bonus sons. So there's a lot of testosterone
Yeah.
surging around the house. They're still all young. I think one of the things that they're teaching me, though, in terms of how we look after ourselves from an emotional perspective, is you have the right to feel feelings. It's just around what you do with them and how you manage them that becomes really important. So I see, like, the boys get quite fiery and they're quite physical, and sometimes they cannot say nice things to each other. And it's like, you guys, you are allowed to feel angry. It would be great if that anger came out in these kinds of ways, as opposed to like throwing punches at each other. So I think working out how you manage your emotions is really important, so that they don't tend to manage you, is probably that other tool that I would have learned as I go through this, because you need to be, or I find, not, you don't need to do anything. It's always your choice.
Yeah.
But I find that being comfortable to sit with feeling sad is important, and recognizing when you are slipping towards an unhealthy level of sadness, so that you can manage it in the right way. It's probably the other tool, I think, which is really important.
Yeah, no, that's really important. Is I like what you said about the young boys, like, kind of steering them towards, hey, it's okay to be angry, but you can express it in this way, and this is productive, and this is creative, or, this gets that energy and that anger out without
Yes,
hurting someone else. So,
yes,
so as
yes,
they're younger, you can like train them in that way, and they can use that later on. That's so good. I love hearing that.
yes. Oh
Yeah.
my gosh. I,
That's a lot of energy from boys in
It
your
is
home.
it is a lot, a lot. It's like living with three tornadoes and a cool breeze, who would be my daughter.
Oh
So,
my goodness. Well,
but
it sounds like a lot of fun though, too.
it is a huge amount of fun.
Yeah.
It's a huge amount of fun. So yeah, so they are great. Um,
Yeah. What do you find most challenging about the work that you're doing right now?
Well, aside from, pandemics throwing a twist in things, it's more just really thinking about how can I manage the family dynamics, and this is a big thing, I think. So my background is in change. That's kind of my specialty. And
Mm.
it's recognizing that, like anything in life, sometimes we think that we've got it all sorted and it's all going smoothly, and then you get thrown a curveball, or, pandemic happens.
Yeah.
So being able to adapt, I think, is really important in business, and looking at what you can do as opposed to what you cannot do, and being okay with letting things go, I think, is really important. So once again, that forgiveness can come into play, with forgiving yourself that things didn't quite work out how you wanted them to. So whether it's around looking at financial forgiveness that you might need to move through so that you can start to grow your business, or that you can take on another opportunity, or you can do a different, like work a different way, I think is really important through that challenge. So a lot of my work, like, I love nothing more than being in a room with people and facilitating workshops. It's great. That has not been the case for most of last year. Even though we have lots of freedom where I live, it was just too unpredictable. So moving work to online is great. And then I think allowing yourself to test out different things and work out what is going to work in this new normal and what is not going to work, and being okay with that is
Yeah.
really important. The outcomes may still be the same in terms of how I want to support people and how I want to help people pivot passions into products and teach them how to do that in the online space. But the process is just different, and it's okay for our processes to be different.
Yeah. Yeah. So you're learning a whole new realm of how to do business, basically. Instead of being in front of people, you're doing things online. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, I had done things online before, so it's a space I'm familiar
Yeah.
with, but just the scale is completely different now. So
Okay.
whereas
Okay.
it may have been like 30% online, now it's like 80, pretty much 80% to 90% online,
And
which is
yeah.
fine.
Yeah, and when you're coaching and you're helping people, it's nice to see that body language. So that's a hurdle that you have to get through with Zoom meetings, and it
Very
feels
true.
like
That is
it sounds like you're doing wonderful things to help people make amazing changes in their lives and be in the right mindset and live, making sure that they can live healthy and also passionately with their
yes.
what they want to do as far as making an income. That's wonderful things. Now, is there any success stories that you can tell us about?
Oh, yes. So there's quite a few. So there are women who would come through my programs who have been through domestic abuse, or they go through their own kinds of traumas. And I just have this habit. So I've been doing this work for about 7 years. I still keep in touch with people just to see where they're at. So it's wonderful when I get messages from someone to say, my products are now being stocked in a store, or I've started doing this, which is
Yeah.
great. And it all comes down to success their ways. But if I think about specific people, there is this wonderful, amazing lady. Her name is Claire. She's a food blogger. Her food blog is called Sprinkles and Sprouts. And she had been through a lot. So she had been through cancer, like me. She had lost her mother. She was a science teacher in the United Kingdom, so in England. And she moved to Australia, and then in bushfires that happened here a few years ago, she completely lost her house.
Oh
So
my goodness.
she'd lost everything pretty
Yeah.
much. And anyway, she came along to one of my programs and she was talking to me. So it comes down to process again around how was she going to make everything work with her food blog and what could she do. And anyway, I talked through a few small changes around the needs to not make 10 chicken dishes in one day, that she could do things differently in terms of the content that she was getting out. And she was consistent with her blog, and her blog now makes multiple six figures, and she does it in a way that she is there for her sons who are still in, like, I think early high school years and also at primary school. She has the school holidays to herself. She's doing something that she loves. She is in a relationship where she feels worthy and appreciated, and her own self-worth has improved. And that was one thing that she had written to me. She goes, I know it sounds really corny, but you restored my self-belief, and that was so important to me. And sometimes we just need, if we can't do it for ourselves, we just need someone to believe in us. It's so powerful. I love her story, and her food is also amazing, which is wonderful. But those stories are like, they happen a lot. There's another mum whose name is Alicia. Sadly, she lost her father last year, but she had been through a bit of like postnatal depression and had trouble falling pregnant. And she started her business out of that called Laced with Kindness. And it's just one of the most beautiful little spots on the internet, which is full of heart and joy. And she started her little business, and it was only fledgling. And now she generates in excess of like $10,000 in sales a month. And she's also working in a way that works for her and her family. So her husband works away on oil rigs and is home every so often. The pandemic definitely put a spin on things for her, because the amount of isolation that they were expected to do when they were going to and from work was quite large. So to sit beside her and watch as she was going through the loss of someone she loved the same as I had, and support her in her business, was a huge, don't know if honor is quite the right word, but I definitely feel very humbled to be there for her as she went through that, and to continue to be there for her, because when you go through trauma and grief, it's not like you manage to tick the box and go, okay, I'm all good now. It goes in waves, and it will come up and surprise us again. So
Yeah.
I'll sit there as she's like, I'm watching her throw herself into her work and be good with everything. And I know that there'll be certain days that pop along where she might want to have a chat about things, but her work is amazing as well. So it's wonderful to see these success stories. And it's something that is accessible to us all. It's giving ourselves that permission to believe in ourselves, and that we are worthy of that.
Yeah. Yeah. It sounds like just being there, being with people and letting them see themselves in a different light through your eyes is really helpful at times with the folks that you've helped. And those are some great success stories. Wow. That is really neat. So they're doing what they love to do. They're there for their family. They're living healthy lives and, overcoming those struggles as well as they come
Yeah.
along. Well, wonderful. You sound like a really, really amazing person. And I
Oh,
hope, yeah, I
thank
hope my
you.
listeners can reach out and learn more about what you're doing. Now, we covered a lot of ground here. Is there anything that you think we may not have mentioned?
So just, I think in terms of, I know you had talked about paying it forward, which I feel is really important as well. So I guess how I look to do that in my work is to make sure that I always have time available for someone who may not necessarily have funds for courses or programs, and to catch up with them and to share that business expertise, or to share that path that I've been on, to help them realize that you don't need to have the best of everything to start your business. You just need to have some basics and to really talk to them around, what do you want to do, and what's the legacy that you want to leave behind in your work, in what you're doing. That will always be important to me to do. Like when people reach out and they need some help, and there's nothing worse, I don't feel, and I've sat in this space, than feeling like you're confused. So if you can have someone just help to simplify those processes and say, look, this is what you have to offer is amazing. Have you thought about offering it in this way and approaching these people? It can just be a big game changer. So I'll always make space for that. I think it's incredibly important.
Yeah, no, really well put. And that sounds like a really valuable thing to have too. So, well, thank you so much, Belle. I really enjoyed speaking with you today about your life, about how you're paying it forward. It's just been a real pleasure.
Thank you, Jess. It's been a pleasure to be on your podcast.
You've been listening to Catalyst for Change, and my name is Jessica Huckabee, your host. Join us next week for another story of resiliency. And please subscribe wherever you listen to your podcasts, and feel free to leave me a comment or email me at catalystforchange20@gmail.com, or on Facebook, we have a page at Catalyst for Change Resiliency.